Public Canadian Politics, Middle East, June 20, 2018. Photo by Justin McIntosh. The undersigned are appalled by the recent deaths in Gaza. At least 110 Palestinians have been killed and thousands injured by sniper fire and noxious gas used by the Israeli military. The recent violence takes place alongside ongoing land theft, destruction of olive groves, construction of Jewish-only roads, imprisonment without due process, and a blockade of Gaza. During its 70-year history, Israel has been as unjust towards Palestinians as the white-ruled apartheid state was to black South Africans. We are concerned that members of parliament would seek to strengthen relations with a country systematically violating Palestinian rights. In particular, we are dismayed that NDP Justice critic Murray Rankin and NDP defense critic Randall Garrison serve as executive members of the Canada-Israel Interparliamentary Group. NDP MPs Peter Julian and Gord Johns are also members of that organization. The Canada-Israel Interparliamentary Group promotes greater friendship between Canadian MPs and members of the Israeli Knesset and has organized events with other pro-Israel lobby organizations. It is wholly inconsistent with the avowed principles of the NDP for the party to be working for greater friendship with a country that is killing and maiming thousands of overwhelmingly nonviolent protesters, many of them children, as well as journalists and doctors, while systematically violating international law and human rights standards with regard to all Palestinians. Accordingly, we call on NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, MPs Garrison, Rankin, Julian, and Johns, and the Parliamentary Caucus to immediately disassociate themselves from the Canada-Israel Interparliamentary Group. List of individuals and groups endorsing statement: Roger Waters, co-founder Pink Floyd; Noam Chomsky, Professor Linda McQuaig, author, NDP candidate Mar Arar, 2007 Time Magazine 100 Most Influential People in the World; Amir Kadir, Quebec Solidaire, member National Assembly of Quebec; Sid Ryan, former president of the Ontario Federation of Labour, NDP member since 1981; Mike Polachek, president Canadian Union of Postal Workers; Chris Hedges, author; Steve Ashton, long-serving NDP member of the Manitoba Legislature and Cabinet Minister; Monia Mazai, academic, author and former NDP candidate; Jim Manley, former NDP MP 1980-88; Richard Falk, professor of international law, emeritus, Princeton University; Norman Finkelstein, author; Antonia Zerbijas, CBC TV and Toronto Star veteran journalist, NDP member; Medea Benjamin, co-founder Coda Pink; L. Jones, activist, educator, journalist and poet; Gordon Laxer, professor emeritus, University of Alberta, NDP member since 1963; Jean Swanson, author, Vancouver housing and poverty activist, NDP member; Murray Dobbin, journalist, broadcaster and author; Aziza Kanji, JD, LLM, legal analyst and writer; Stephen Von Sahovsky, president, Vancouver. Local 400 Hossein Fazeli, writer and film director, winner of 37 awards; Martin Duckworth, documentary filmmaker, winner of Le Prix du Québec 2015; Dara Culhane, professor of anthropology at Simon Fraser University, winner 2018 Weaver Tremblay Award of the Canadian Association of Anthropology; Gary Kinsman, gay liberation and social justice activist, co-author of The Canadian War on Queers; Ernest Tate, former vice president of CUBE, Local 1; Jess McKenzie, longtime NDP activist; Herman Rosenfeld, retired Canadian Auto Workers National Staff Person. Former NDP member Mohammed I. Fadel, Associate Professor of Law, University of Toronto Faculty of Law; Chris Huxley, Professor Emeritus, Trent University; longtime NDP member Charlene Ganage, Associate Professor Emerita, University of Windsor; longtime NDP member Samir Gandhi, Associate Professor and Director of the Institute for the Humanities, SFU Reimbody; Associate Professor of Law Faisal Qaidi, lawyer and Professor of Law Natalie Zeman Davis, Professor of History Tyler Shipley, Professor of Culture, Society and Commerce, Humber College; Joseph G. Dibane, former chair of the Middle East Discussion Group; Yavar Hamid, human rights lawyer; former NDP member Robert Masood; Beit Zatan Faisal Baba, Associate Professor, Osgood Hall Law School, York University; NDP member Emily Carrasco; Professor Emeritus Martin Luckix; writer Jason Woods, Vice President ILWU. Local 400 Leslie Miller, retired sociology professor at the University of Calgary, NDP supporter Suzanne Weiss, Palestinian rights activist and Holocaust survivor John Riddell, author and editor, NDP member John Orritt, President Thornhill NDP Federal Writing Association Richard Feidler, writer, translator, Ontario Bar Maria Paez Victor Chair, Canadian, Latin American and Caribbean Policy Centre Marion Pollack, retired Canadian Union of Postal Workers representative, NDP donor Marv Gandel, former journalist and trade unionist Eve Engler, author, NDP member Art Young, Palestine solidarity activist, Canadian political prisoner, Quebec 1970 Andrea Glickman, NDP member, Vancouver Nick Fillmore, news editor and producer with the CBC for more than 20 years Conrad Alexandrovich. Theatre artist, scholar, instructor at University of Victoria, NDP member Nadia Abuzara, associate professor, University of Ottawa, NDP donor and longtime member David Rafat, professor emeritus, University of Toronto Tim McCaskill, author, Queer Progress Larry Hannon, writer, historian and NDP donor Richard Sanders, researcher, writer, anti-war activist Carolee Melange, peace activist Larry Wardles, born Jewish, NDP member Victoria BC Randy Janssen, college instructor, peace and justice studies Fred Jones, former President Dawson Teachers Union, NDP member Ali Mala, federal NDP candidate election 2000, former Vice President Ontario NDP Graham Russell, Director Rights Action Peter Eglin, Professor Emeritus of Sociology, Wilfrid Laurier University, longtime NDP member Michael A. Leibowitz, Professor Emeritus of Economics, Simon Fraser University Hassan Husseini, labor negotiator and activist, member of Unifor and Labour for Palestine John Price, Professor of History, University of Victoria, longtime NDP supporter Greg Albo Department of Politics, York University, Centre for Social Justice William S. Geimer, Professor of Law Emeritus, member of Vancouver Island Peace and Disarmament Network Anthony Fenton, researcher PhD candidate at York U. Arnold August, author Steve Heron, Professor, convener, Palestine Study Group Catherine Nastovsky, Associate, Institute on Globalization and the Human Condition, McMaster University and Labour for Palestine Everett Hoogers, labor researcher, retired CUPW National Union Representative David Burnins, Union Leader, NDP candidate and current NDP member Eva Manley, retired filmmaker, activist, lifelong NDP, now Green Robert Mahood, family physician, member of NDP Socialist Caucus Kevin Nish Mavi Marmara Massacre survivor Sid Schneiad, research director, Telecommunications Workers Union, retired, member, National Steering Committee, Independent Jewish Voices Canada Ken Hebert, Palestine Solidarity activist and retired trade unionist Chris Cook, managing editor and broadcaster Pacific Free Press, Guerrilla Radio Howard Breen, executive director. Urgent Climate and Ocean Rapid Response, Unifor 433 Derek Ismail, Professor Kimball Cariou, editor of People's Voice newspaper Debbie Hubbard, member of Amnesty International Kelowna, Palestine Study Group Vernon, NDP member Mark Golden, Professor Emeritus of Classics, University of Winnipeg, longtime NDP donor and campaign worker Kevin Scarrett, trade union researcher Randy Caravaggio, sculptor Al Engler, retired trade unionist and longtime NDP member Sephora Grignon, awakened citizen, Gabriola Island, BC Mason Kamsia, director of the Palestine Museum of Natural History at the Palestine Institute of Biodiversity and Sustainability at Bethlehem University Leah Tarachansky, Israeli, Canadian journalist and documentary filmmaker Charlotte Cates, international coordinator, Samidan Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network Waleed Shahal, continuing lecturer, Lakehead University, co-chair Diversity Thunder Bay, former NDP member Phil Little, retired teacher from Ontario Ladysmith, BC. Taina Maki Shahal, contract lecturer, Lakehead University, former NDP member Karen Rodman, Reverend, NDP member Morgan McWigan, ESL teacher Jean Rance, retired trade unionist and longtime NDP member Joan Russo, Global Compliance Research Project Laura Westra, Professor Emerita, Philosophy, Jason Q. Nin, Toronto teacher and writer Henry Evans Ten Brink, Human Rights, Labor and Pro-Palestine activist Julius R. Scott, Executive Board member of OPSEU and member of NDP Socialist Caucus Ken Stone, Hamilton Mountain NDP member for 35 years Ian Angus, editor Climate Bob Chandler, COPE 343 member, Toronto Danforth NDP member Paul Tatro, CUPE staff lawyer, retired, longtime NDP member Eva Bartlett, activist and independent journalist who lived 3 years in Gaza Dimitri Lakaris, lawyer, journalist and activist, NDP member Kevin McKay, author, professor at Mohawk College of Applied Arts and Technology, labor and co-op activist Ruben Roth, associate professor, labor studies program Laurentian University, NDP activist in Oshawa riding since 1984 Amina Sheikh, union organizer, worked on numerous NDP campaigns Eric Martin, professor of philosophy, Edouard Montpetit, CEGEP Byron Rempel Brickholder, member of Mennonite Church Manitoba Working Group on Palestine and Israel Krishna Lal Bihari, member Canada-Palestine Support Network, President Street. John's NDP constituency, Manitoba, Michael J. Carpenter, postdoctoral fellow, University of Victoria Mark Etkin, MD FRCPC Ed Lehman, NDP member, Cooper, Saskatchewan Bianca Muyenyi, activist and author Rana Bose, engineer, author and playwright, NDP member and DG Borough Norman Navrotsky, author, musician, actor, part-time faculty Concordia Rachel Engler Stringer, associate professor, community health and epidemiology, University of Saskatchewan, NDP member Joe Emersberger, uniform member, writer David Weller, retired teacher and IJV member Eric Shredge, retired professor Gary Engler, retired union officer with UTA4 Local 2000 in Vancouver, NDP member Munira Mito, Canadian Palestinian activist and NDP member David Kattenberg, science educator, web publisher and social activist Stephen Ellis, lawyer and activist Barry Wise, leader, chairperson NDP Socialist Caucus, delegate to most NDP federal and provincial conventions since 1971 David Heap, associate professor, UWO, human rights. Ferris, Ph.D., professor of political science Frida Knott, Raging Grammy, NDP member, Independent Jewish Voices Victoria Corey Greenlees, Victoria Peace Coalition SL Rafat, neuroepidemiologist Genevieve Nevin, organizer Independent Jewish Voices Canada Victoria, NDP activist and member Gavin Friddle, Canada Research Chair in International Development, NDP member Justin Pador, associate professor, York University Rana Abdullah, CPA Palestinian activist and Fights for What's Right Human Rights Award recipient 2014 Georgina Kirkman, member of Independent Jewish Voices and Amnesty International, Victoria Mustafa Henaway, organizer at Immigrant Workers Center Bruce Katz, organizer Palestinian and Jewish Unity, former NDP member Malcolm Guy, filmmaker, Montreal Junaid Khan, writer, journalist, human rights activist, former NDP member Annette Lanyal, human rights and social justice advocate, NDP member Calgary Nose Hill Teresa Wolfwood, Barnard Boker Centre Foundation Dan Freeman Malloy, postdoctoral fellow, Université du Québec Montreal Cheryl Nestle, Ph.D., NDP member Alan Sears, professor, Ryerson University David Camfield, labor activist and educator Frida Gutman, artist, activist, member of Tedayman Virginia Daniel, Victoria Raging Grammy, Kaya member, NDP member Judith Deutsch, psychoanalyst Ron Dart, Department of Political Science, Philosophy, Religious Studies University of the Fraser Valley Susan Clark, nonpartisan peace activist, Souk BC Kevin McKay, former campaigns officer at Ontario Public Service Employees Union Drew Oya J, co-founder of the media co-op, Friends of Public Services and Courage Edwin E. Daniel, World War II veteran, scientist and peace activist Antonio Artuso, activist, translator and interpreter, Communist Reconstruction Canada Derek O'Keefe, Vancouver-based organizer and editor with Ricochet Media Henry Veltmeyer, Professor Emeritus of Development Studies at St. Mary's University Jerome Clausen, UMass Boston, author of several books on Canadian foreign policy Suhad Arar, policy researcher at Al-Haq Human Rights Organization in Ramallah, Palestine Ismail Zayed MD. President, Canada-Palestine Association William K. Carroll, professor and co-director of the Corporate Mapping Project Sociology Department University of Victoria Mohammed Ali, the socialist vocalist, artist Yezin Kader, former member of Nova Scotia NDP Provincial Council Andrew Mitrovica, writer and former executive assistant to NDP MPs Pauline Jewett and Simone de Young Groups, Independent Jewish Voices Canada Canada-Palestine Support Network CanPalNet, Victoria Peace Coalition NDP Socialist Caucus Canadian BDS. Coalition Palestinian and Jewish Unity Toronto BDS Action United for Palestine Toronto, GTA People for Peace London, Ontario Socialist Action, League pour l'Action Socialist Palestine Solidarity Network, Edmonton Coalition Against Israeli Apartheid Victoria Mid-Islanders for Justice and Peace in the Middle East Barnard Boker Centre, Foundation Canada Palestine Association Canadian Peace Congress Related Reading Tony Hall July 30th 17 Christo Ivalis the 12th of June 17 Eve Engler October 18th 17 Editorial May 14th 18